So, hi, I'm Nick Jerome, one of the tutors within professional development, and I'm here with Bill Faust, another tutor with in professional development. We're going to be talking today about public speaking and presentations and sharing some of our thoughts from our experiences. So, Bill, I'd love you if you wouldn't mind just to introduce yourself, just briefly.
Nick, of course, mate. And it's good to be here. Who am I? Why are Nick and I talking to you about this? I myself am a keynote speaker, and I have done a TED talk about disrupting disruption. And I go around the world talking at leading business schools about Pitch Yourself, which is the book I wrote back in 2001, amazingly. But it's been ongoing, and we've had new versions of it, etc., etc. And now I spend a lot of time talking about public speaking, talking about presentations, talking about pitching, because fundamentally, I spent most of my career, just my early career, working in the advertising industry. And so I was always up in front of people and having to do credentials pitches more than anything else. In those credentials pitches, why do you want to listen to me? What is of value? What can I offer? What are you going to take away? And I suppose that's why now I do a lot of work with many companies, not including in professional development and other companies, and we are talking about presentations and
Brilliant.
to a degree the difference between presentations and public speaking, because
Yeah,
fundamentally they are actually slightly different
yeah.
things.
We'll come on to look at that, Bill.
And
Thanks.
we will indeed.
Yeah,
And so that's me in a nutshell. And
yeah.
I think it's
Excellent.
important that Nick actually says who he is, because he has quite a lot of experience with this too.
Yeah, well, I've got a lot of experience public speaking. Obviously I'm a tutor within professional development, so every day I'm in front of groups presenting and facilitating. But I've done a lot of pitches in the past, notably because I used to work in sales, and so I used to do a lot of sales pitches, presenting to
Marketing, sales. Yeah, yeah.
groups of clients, big and small, really. So something else I love doing, and I also train in public speaking and presentation skills. So, but Bill, let's hear a little bit about your experiences and your perspectives, really. So, what for you has been the most impactful speech or presentation you've ever heard, and what in particular made it stand out for you?
This is a silly one, because it's one which I would urge you to go and actually view, as opposed to, because it's a TED talk. And because my passion, I hate the word passion, because you should demonstrate passion as opposed to say the word. However, it's a talk by Will Stevens, a TED talk by Will Stevens, and it's how to look smart when doing a TED talk. What's fascinating about it, and I'm not going to spoil it at all, but what's fascinating about it is he says nothing, nada, rien de tout. Yet he uses every single technique you can use in the book, and that's what we're going to talk about today with Nick. And I think that's where and why I find that one really good. Another one which is just exciting, partly because of the subject matter, and it also, I'm biased here because I did a talk about disrupting disruption, a TED talk. Guy Kawasaki, he did a fantastic one on the art of innovation, and I think that that's also worth a view.
Brilliant.
But in terms of impactful, so many impactful speeches.
Of
I mean,
course.
I've
Yeah.
heard my friend Nick do impactful speeches, so hey ho. But if ones you can look at and view, yes, Will Stevens, Guy Kawasaki, and even Bill Faust, disrupting disruption.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for those recommendations, Bill. Would you say that you prefer public speaking or more structured presentations?
um, I enjoy public speaking, and I enjoy public speaking. Well, it's interesting because you look at it, and when you see, I think public speaking slightly more on the basis that it's the control, the flow. You know where you're going. You know what you're about to do. I mean, presentations, do not get me wrong. I love the communication orientation
Yeah.
presentations. However, that's the interactive side of things.
Yeah.
However, the key thing about doing some public speaking is that you want to make it sound effortless.
Yeah.
And the only way you can make it sound effortless is, oh, practice, practice, practice.
Yeah.
And by the way, that's the power of three, which is another technique we would probably talk about. And I think that when you look at it, the presentations are structured on a personal level,
Mm.
and so they can feel sometimes less sincere
Yeah,
than doing a talk. I mean, Nick, the you know as well as I do that sometimes you're doing presentations effectively for other people,
yeah,
and so it's not really what you're saying. Whereas a public speaking event is a lot of it is, you know, what you're wanting to say and your knowledge, and you've been asked because you're the subject matter
yeah,
expert
yeah.
in that particular thing, and that's
Absolutely.
why I think it's more sincere.
Yeah, absolutely. And the sort of structured presentation, maybe it's a little bit more used in some business contexts, but there's definitely a
Hmm.
difference as we can see. Brilliant. Have
No,
you
I think you're right. It's the side, the business side, you know, and I'm not going to say for 1 minute that presentations don't have the value of public speaking, because presentations in this case, especially as you said, in the business side, that's where the value is, because you've got to get those things across, and you've got to understand, if it's a figures presentation, if it's a open presentation, what are you doing, how are you doing it, and the whole issue of internal communication. I mean, I think probably all of us, and we both have a smile on our faces here, because internal presentations are one of the hardest things you can really do, because internal comms, they're not as they're just not as structured as external comms, and you need to have that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Bill, I'm sure we're both. I'm sure many people watching will have experienced death by PowerPoint.
I'm sure they have.
It's got its place, it's got its use, and other slide methodologies are available. But what do you think a common pitfall that people fall into when they rely a little bit too much a bit too heavily on slides?
Common pitfall. I think that a common pitfall on relying on slides too much is, and dare I say I may have done this myself,
Hmm.
is that you sometimes, especially if you don't know the subject matter as well as you might want to know it, you hide effectively, although you're in public view, you're hiding behind the slides,
Yeah,
and you're wanting people to look at said slides as opposed to actually looking at you, because fundamentally you're not hiding.
yeah,
You are there, and
yeah,
they can see you. And that whole death by PowerPoint and the slides themselves is, yes, people tend to hide. They tend to use that as a crutch. And how many times have you been in that situation where, yes, I'm doing this presentation, and suddenly, oh, where am I?
yeah,
Oh,
absolutely.
I know. I'll look at the slides, and then you look behind you, and so you're no longer looking at the
Lost your
audience.
audience, yeah, absolutely. No, I've seen it happen many times, and like you, I've kind of weaned myself off PowerPoint a lot. I used to use it a lot in the beginning because it was a bit new and exciting, but I think through overuse, I've realised it's much better just to come across a lot more authentically and naturally. Yeah.
No,
Um,
actually, on that point, Nick, and that's why I think over time that certainly, it's a really good point. I too, I mean, I know we know each other well, but I too have spent so much time doing PowerPoint presentations, and other methodologies, as Nick said, are available. But you do these things, and suddenly it's like, okay, yeah, why am I doing this? And so you're weaning yourself off.
yeah,
And the essence is, if you're doing a presentation, get those slides down to an absolute minimum.
absolutely. Minimum words, more visuals,
Hmm.
and make them
Yeah.
in. Yeah,
Best
absolutely.
slide I ever did was a question mark.
Yeah,
And the reason why is because that opened up, questions.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Picture speaks a thousand words, as they say.
Indeed.
Yeah, Bill, what do you think are some of the techniques from public speaking that could perhaps improve a more formal business presentation?
Um, Techniques in public speaking. So effectively asked me public speaking versus presentations.
Oh yeah,
um, I think that when you some of the techniques, I think that one of the first things we always need to do is actually understand what the audience want.
hmm,
And I'm a marketer, as you know, and I know you know this subject exceedingly well too. And one of the things which people do need to understand is, when you go to see a presentation, when you go to see any public speaking, you've got to be thinking, what's in it for me? And the person who's doing it has got to understand, what is it in it for me?
Mm.
And if it's not, if you haven't worked that bit out, there's actually no value to the presentation. So I
Yeah,
think in terms of public speaking and looking at it in terms of the tips you can give for presentations, is with public speaking, you because you've prepared, you do a huge amount of stuff. You want to look at it from the perspective of, okay, take that element of understanding the audience and bring that into the
yeah,
presentation. I think that when you look at this, you know, you've got to think about it in terms of it's just being more, and I haven't been concise here, but be more concise, be clear.
yeah,
Clarity is a gem, and that's where you want to get. Public speaking does that a lot. Presentations, people waffle.
yeah, yeah. I always find actually when I see people doing more business presentations that they are at their best in the Q&A session when it's more natural and that when they're absolutely engaged on what it is that their audience wants. And sometimes the driest of presentations comes to life in the Q&A bit, which is ironically the bit which is less prepared, but it's just more authentic and more natural.
But isn't it interesting? Because that's the bit which is actually because you're the SME,
Mm,
that's the bit that you know so well.
yeah,
And I suppose going back to your original question, one of the tips, and the tips would be, oh, I know, make sure you know your subject back to front, inside out, upside
yeah,
down, and any other which way you can think of,
yeah, yeah,
because that is, I've been, dare I say, to the pub with people, and they have said, "Oh no, it must be awful. I don't know how you do presentations. I don't know how you do public speaking." And suddenly they will sit there and bore me for 3 hours about football.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, please.
absolutely, yeah. I mean, the thing is that, you just raised an interesting one. A lot of people are very afraid of public speaking. I come across many, many people who are, and
Indeed.
I think it's probably a bit apocryphal, but they say that the things people are most afraid of are death and public speaking, and death is number two. It's that sort of thing. What would
I
be,
thought death was number one, actually.
well,
More people are scared of death than actually public speaking than death.
yeah, that's what I said. Yeah,
I'm sorry, I put
yeah, yeah.
sorry.
More afraid of yeah, death is number two. So I wonder what your tips would be. I'll tell you my top tip, but your top tip for people who are a bit nervous and anxious about public speaking. My top tip is to make eye contact with everybody as quickly as you can. Even just fleeting eye contact sort of helps to create a bond and a connection with your audience both ways, and so you both feel more at ease and more relaxed with each other. So that would be my top tip. What would be your top tips for conquering nerves and anxiety? And I know these days you don't really feel those, but what would be your tips for
No,
doing?
no, that's a lie. I do.
Ah, call me out.
I find it quite fascinating that I still do get nervous. And one of the reasons I get nervous is because I know we slightly digress here, but one of the reasons I get nervous about public speaking, or when you're just going on, is I have no idea what the audience are going to think about. And
Yeah,
so you go on. I mean, I told you that example of when I was doing the TED talk. You know, I don't know if this person was trying to be kind or trying to be just vicious, but they said to me literally a minute before I was going on stage for the TED talk in Lille and EDHEC, which Nick and I know both well because we've worked there for 9, 10 years. And so excuse me, a cat. But they asked me, "Are you okay? Are you ready?" Now, just think about this.
yeah, yeah.
Of course I'm not.
I had a similar one. I was doing a presentation to a group of directors of investment banks. So quite a high profile presentation I did a couple of years ago. Just before I went on, somebody came up to me and said, "Make it interesting, will you?"
Great, isn't it? Yeah, make it interesting. Oh, I know. I was thinking I was going to make it dull.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
no,
Bill, Bill,
so
we've talked quite a lot around around the topic. I think there's some really interesting stuff, and I know your experiences have been great, and you really put them into practice. And I think some of the references you gave, your TED talk and other talks as well, you can find TED in particular. I
mm,
think are brilliant places for people to look for inspiration and support around this. But what would be your sort of main key tips for presenting? What
no,
would you say if
main key tips. I
yeah,
mean, I think the main key tips. Well, where do we start? One of the things I think that we can look at is the key tips would be um, understand who you're speaking to,
yeah,
and crucially, why.
yeah,
Then you can think about it in terms of why do you think they want to listen to you?
yeah,
Um, you know, I know Nick, you and I have worked together in many times, and we've done some work, and it's been like, really? And so we've got to be quite careful about what we're doing, and it's the if we give them a reason to want to listen
yeah.
by understanding their needs, their motivations, their desires, then it is super.
I agree. And
Structure,
I would add to that. I think ask them in
yeah, go on.
advance and as much as you can, build a relationship with the audience ahead of being in front of the audience. And so,
If you
if you
can,
can talk to people in advance and really check in, do a bit of what's the word, customer research, sort of finding out what people want, not making assumptions. It's really easy to assume, isn't it? And I think having a
yes, and we know what it makes of you.
yeah, exactly. And if you want people to, if you really want to give people what they want, we need to ask them what they want. I think that's the important thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Any other top tips before we
oh,
finish?
we have quite a few here. Because I think this is fundamentally let's Nick, what I'm going to do, if I may, I'm going to indulge me, is look at it from the perspective of what makes, what are the elements that you can,
Hmm,
put together here. Structure. I think structure is massively important.
hmm,
I do work with universities, I do work with client companies,
yeah,
and when it comes to structure, people don't understand that a simple structure. Tell them what it's three parts. Tell
yeah,
them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them again.
yeah,
And in short, that is the introduction, that is the main body, and then that is the summary.
yeah.
Now,
I think you're right because a lot of presenters are perhaps a little bit less experienced or less effective. They assume that because they've said it once, they've said it. And that's not
yes,
the case, isn't it?
and you've got to say it three times.
Yeah,
And notice I'm using three here
yeah,
because ironically, you'll believe my hands before you believe my speech. And
absolutely.
that is something which is really quite interesting because if I'd done that, you'd have all been going, excuse
Yeah.
me.
Just
And
just to add to the power of three, the ancient Romans used to use that. They used to call it a tricolon crescendo, where you say three things, but you kind of make them a little bit bigger each time. So the power
yes,
of three
so
is something that
how
goes
big, how enormous, how
2,000
massive.
plus years. Yeah, absolutely.
But still staying on structure, the other ways of looking at structure are if you have the three elements in terms of tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them again. Once you have those three elements, you
Yeah,
then can look at it in terms of things like causal patterns, theory, solution, problem, solution, and that can be audience problem, that can be your problem, your solution. And so if you have those three elements, also I think the art of persuasion and rhetoric by Aristotle, ethos, pathos, and logos,
yeah,
absolutely crucial because you want to get the credibility, you want to get the buy-in, and you want to be able to back it up with logic.
yeah,
And so there, Martin Luther King, I have a dream. You can't get any better than that.
yeah, yeah.
Um, I think that other key things I see so many times when people do a presentation, and I know you have seen this because we've worked together on this, where people try to memorize their talk.
Yeah.
It's
Never
like,
works.
don't, it's
This reading out, I think people reading out, and I've seen people reading out verbatim from a script, and it just doesn't work because you're not connecting with the audience on a more
and
emotional.
yeah, I mean, on that point, I think that when you're looking at it, you know, if you're not memorizing, what you should be doing is really something quite simple. And that is, if you're the subject matter expert, you know that subject. So all you have to do is think of the 3 or 4 elements that you're going to cover,
Basically. You
and
memorize,
they are
yeah,
your bullet points. That's
you
it.
memorize your structure, and then it
Exactly.
flows from that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Brilliant.
Um,
Bill, we're running out of time.
are we?
One last top tip from you.
One
What
last top
last,
tip. Gosh.
and I'll make
Um,
share mine. Yeah.
okay. I think there's well, I mean, repetition, repetition, repetition. Um, rhetorical
That, said that
questions.
already.
Tell stories.
You're right.
Tell
You're right.
stories. Natural stories. We're all natural storytellers,
Yeah.
and I think they're crucial. One last time, I think that yeah, don't get flummoxed by big issues.
Yeah.
Uh, I've told Nick this story many a time, but I was the keynote speaker for Fiat Chrysler automobiles, and I was in Puglia in southern Italy, and I was staying at a beautiful place, Fasano, Borgo in Asia. And on the day I arrived, Alessandro, who is the client, he said to me, Bill, the audience tonight are Italian. Can you do your talk in Italian? Now, I don't speak Italian. Nick knows I speak English and some okay French.
Just about.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know yours is better than mine, but hey ho. I live there. I try my best. And Alessandro said to me, when I said, "Oh, I don't speak Italian," and he said, "I know, but you speak French." And I said, "But as far as I know, French and Italian aren't the same languages." And he said, "But they share the same grammar." Now I couldn't go wrong. I couldn't say no to that. They do.
Yeah.
And so I thought, oh, okay, he really does want me to do this.
Yeah.
So I poodled off. I had 3 hours, and this is again key. I didn't memorize the Italian. What I did is I learned some key verbs.
Yeah.
And because the structure is similar to French, I thought, yeah, I can do that. And it's the pronunciation on a lot of these things which were different. And so what I would strongly suggest is do not get flustered.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Relax, stay cool,
Absolutely.
and buy yourself time.
Yeah.
So speak slowly.
Yeah.
I think that speaking slowly is quite interesting. Some people talk about things where they go like, and that's because they're speaking too quickly.
Yeah.
If you take your time, suddenly it becomes more realistic,
Yeah.
it becomes more understandable, and it becomes more sincere.
Yeah. Those filler words, as they're called, the ums and
There
the
you
etc. Yeah. Well, my top tip would be to prepare yourself physically. I would say, really, before you do a presentation, go for a walk, get some fresh air, drink some water, make sure you're feeling it into it, physically. Stand up straight, open up your shoulders and things like that would absolutely make a huge difference. Physicality of your presence really, really makes a difference because, as we all know, first impressions matter. So if you're walking on stage with that physical presence, you've kind of almost won the battle. Bill, we're
Yes.
out of time.
Okay, my friend.
Mind you, so I've been timing us. Lovely talking to you, and thank you so much for your tips. And for anybody watching, thanks for watching. And
And
do
we have so many more too, as well, because
absolutely do
we've
come up
hardly covered anything really.
in professional development if you would like to uh, dive in a little bit more and perhaps give it a practice and get some feedback. We'd look forward to that. So great to see you all, and good to see you too, Bill. See you soon. Bye.
Thank you, sir. Cheers.